Thank you so much, Joe, for being with us this morning. This is our second coffee morning. If you've not been to or watched one of these back before, we are Flood. We're an artist development company that supports artists at every stage of their journey through open office hours, consultancy, funding help, and essentially anything you need to get your career started or keep it going. These coffee mornings are completely free, and we're chatting with creatives from across the sector about the amazing work they are doing and, most importantly, how they began. So we can hopefully give you some practical advice and ideas of how to kickstart your career. So today we're with the wonderful Joe, who is Artistic Director of Chronic Insanity, as well as many other things. So Joe, I'm going to pass over to you to give you a little intro and tell us a bit about what you do.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Joe. My pronouns are they, them. I am, as Lottie said, Artistic Director of Chronic Insanity, which is a sort of a theatre and digital theatre company based up in Nottingham in the East Midlands. I also do a bunch of other producing stuff. So I'm also currently digital producer at Dada and producer at the Chronically Ill Artists Network, which are both disability arts organisations. And I do a lot of freelance consulting for creative organizations when it comes to things like accessibility or digital producing or creative technology and everything around that, particularly looking at things like mixed reality experiences, so virtual reality, augmented reality, and everything in between and vaguely relevant.
Amazing. So this is the question we asked everyone when they first come on these coffee mornings, and it's what was the first paid role did you do in the arts?
That's a very good. I How far back do we want to go?
The
Like
very first.
very first. Technically, child model.
I was not
Technically.
expecting that.
Well, my parents were journalists, and sometimes you would need like an annoying little brother in a photo shoot sort of thing. I think I only did it twice, or three times if you count when I was a baby. But yeah, technically, if we count that as the arts, failing that, magician. When I was a teenager, I used to do people's birthday parties and events and things, and that paid surprisingly well actually. Even at that age, you could make 50 quid for a half hour of something, or a couple of £100 in an evening. But maybe that then proved to me what my value was, and so I think that has actually helped moving forward in my career to be able to, like, it's always good to know that your fallback is somewhat supportive from a financial basis. And to be perfectly honest, you could practice for like a month and be a good enough. Anyone could practice for a month and be a good enough magician to start making a living from it. It's a surprising safety net people don't normally consider. But yeah, those are my earliest jobs in the arts. Other than that, was probably employing myself on something.
Amazing. I love that. That's definitely the best answer we've had to that question so far. And I think it's really great that you spoke about knowing your value as well, because I think when you're starting out as a freelancer, a lot of people, myself included, find it really hard to price yourself. And I think sort of knowing where you should put your work and your value is such a key skill to have, even if it's your very first role. And speaking of that, what sort of skills and sort of tactile tasks and things do you actually do in a lot of the roles you do now? Because I think it's quite easy to put a title like digital producer out there,
Yeah.
and a lot of people don't actually know what it really involves.
So I definitely say that the style of producing I do is more within the kind of creative producing side, and I'm definitely making creative decisions alongside the logistical ones. That's also because I'm quite a multidisciplinary artist and theatre maker. I am a multi-hyphenate, and a lot of the projects I work on, I have a creative hand in, whether that's writing or directing, most usually, or doing some of the kind of design work on stuff, as well as producing. So I do produce a lot of my own stuff. But if I'm working on someone else's project, if I'm freelancing producing, then I tend to focus on things like logistics, contracting, budgeting, and timeline planning. I don't tend to focus on fundraising. that's not my best skill, or because I own my own company, I just can't write a funding bid for someone else without feeling like I should be spending this time writing a funding bid for my own company and the artists that we look after. So that happens less frequently from a freelance perspective. But other than that, I guess kind of, project planning up for the beginning of the project, and then that sort of general managing of stuff as we go along.
Great. And you talked about how one of your first jobs outside of model and magician was when you'd employed yourself under your own company and then picked up bits of freelance work. I think it'd be great to talk about sort of how those experiences of work you created for yourself helped you then get those first freelance jobs, and kind of what that pipeline was like, and how you were able to shape that experience into something that made you actually really employable.
Yeah. So we started Chronic Insanity in May of 2019, so kind of 5 years ago. It's our 5th year anniversary this month that we're recording this, and our first show was in September 2019, and that was just an amateur production of a play that me and our co-founder Nat really liked. And then we did a show each month, again, all kind of like amateur productions of stuff. We did the first version of a scratch night, which would later become something we do much more of. And then just before the lockdown hit in March, we got some Art Council funding for the first time. And that was, I think, about 12 grand, which we said we would make 6 productions with. And I think it was off of the back of that funding, and then lockdown hitting, and then us realizing that we had a lot of the capabilities to make digital work, that we already had some scripts that were relevant for online stories, that we were confident with the tools that you need in order to make work online, video editing, sound editing, at that time, at least, those sorts of things, being able to kind of feel competent and that we, had something that was worth saying. And also we had funding we needed to spend on something. And now we had a bunch of artists we wanted to support financially at a point where people needed that support more than ever. So I think it was during that, between, we took April off and then we did May 2020 onwards was when we started doing smaller projects. And I don't think we initially paid ourselves for 1 or 2, but it was once we got into the summer, there was at least one show where I did, I think, literally all of the elements of, which is called Conduit, which was a show performed via people's email inboxes, where I played a character that was asking the audience for advice on recording a video for a loved one they were out of contact with. And 4 or 5 videos would be emailed across to you over the course of an evening or a fortnight, depending on how long you wanted to experience the show for. And I think I wrote and directed and performed, and then did all the music and design and sent all the emails by hand for that show. And that was the first one where I was like, okay, I think I can justify paying myself on this. There isn't any other cast or crew. This is just me. So yeah, I think that was the first. So for me, it was about 9 months into starting the company, and we did about a show a month. So it was probably show number 9 or 10 or so. Yeah.
Amazing. And I think, because one thing people might not know about Chronic Insanity, if they've just come across it now, is the real volume of work you guys do. So I think, was it your first project that was the 12 shows in 12 months that has then just continued?
Yeah, that's how we started the company. We Nat and I, as co-founders, were at university at the time. I was doing my PhD, and Nat was doing their masters. And we just saw a lot of the best shows we were watching students make at uni were being done in about, a week and a half or 2 weeks. And they were, tough shows tackling big topics with really good set and lighting designs. They were done really well. And our students here, I went to the University of Nottingham, the Nottingham Youth there, didn't give you massive budgets to do stuff either. So it felt like, with all the constraints, really good art was being made. So we thought, what's actually stopping us from making a good show every month? And then we were like, probably something we're not considering, but that first year is us exploring that and trying to figure out, can we do 12 shows or 12 projects in 12 months? And we ended that first year having done 18. And then we did our second year, we're like, okay, maybe that was a fluke. We were in lockdown for a bunch of it. We got funding that helped us make a third of those. What happens if we carry on forwards? Can we make this a sustainable way of running the company? And then that next year, I think we did 24 projects. And so we went, okay, cool. And we know where the pinch points are, the bottlenecks, where it's more difficult, where it's easier, where we enjoy it more or less. So now let's start working with other people, more freelancers. Let's start getting more people in to support this. We've hit year number 5. We've done 100 projects. So that's averaging about 20 a year. Last year we did 30, which I think tied us with Play a Pie and a Pint as most prolific theatre company in the country. At least according to their metrics, they said they were the most prolific and they did 30. So that's a tie. But yeah, and now we're planning ahead, moving stuff for the rest of this year. We've taken a bit of time to plan stuff and to look at business plans and figure out. We've done 5 years, which is our sort of like experiment period. We want to carry on as a company. How is it best to position ourselves where we find ourselves? So yeah.
Amazing. I think it's so great to hear about just that sheer volume of work, because I think especially at the minute it can feel like it's a really difficult landscape to just create things in. And I think one thing that Chronic has always been amazing at is showing people that regardless of where you are, you can be creative and make things, especially with a lot of the digital stuff that's available to a lot of people for free online as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so a lot of this is formed by by our circumstances and my academic background as well. Like academically, I've done psychology as a degree, and then my PhD was in computer sciences, but looking at like the way in which people interact with technology. And it became clear from that background that digital theatre was definitely theatre and was obviously theatre, and that a traditional way of understanding theatre as having to be in the same place at the same time was just limited by what people was possible before we had wider spread technologies, particularly like telecommunications technologies, which allowed you to communicate at the same time with somebody in a different place, or recordings that let you, talk to somebody at a different time and a different place. But you can still create that feeling of communication, that feeling of presence, that feeling of liveness through all these means. So we did a bunch of shows to check that, and that just helped reinforce for us that digital theatre is theatre. And once you accept that, then as a theatre maker, it's great because digital theatre is more affordable. You don't have to, mainly because you don't have to hire buildings and pay landlords stuff. You can just make work wherever you already are, record it, release it. You pay artists the exact same amount, so it doesn't shortchange anyone from a creative perspective or a financial perspective. It's still sustainable for people, but it's more environmentally sustainable than loads of audiences all traveling in their cars to one place and then having to light and heat a massive theatre building or a site-specific space past when it's usually open. It's more accessible. You can add captions and audio description and sign language interpretation. You can re-edit and adjust things depending on what your audience needs, even making different versions of the same show. And it allows you to interact with a more greater variety of artists. You can be more inclusive and more diverse because if you're working online, then you don't have to work with the people you know around you. You can meet people from all over the country, all over the world, in our cases, and make work that can talk about their stories, where you can find common ground between their world and your world. And now you might actually have something that's common ground between loads of people. We also always approach work in a kind of a lo-fi way. We aren't necessarily worried about the quality of the execution. We're worried about the quality of the content and the quality of the idea, of the story we're telling. But fundamentally, theatre is about suspending your disbelief, and that you can push that as far as you can push anything. And that theatre started with someone standing up around a campfire, telling a story to people as the light danced across their face and the forest or the world around them. You don't need any more than that. You don't need set. You don't need costume. You don't need props. Maybe some individual shows do. Maybe some key elements, if you're going for minimal staging, will help then those individual elements shine. You can balance not having anything with then very much having some things at some points. And I think it's a blend of that lo-fi approach and that acceptance of the digital world being a meaningful place to do theatre and to tell these stories that means that we can make a large amount of work. And then when shows need more attention, need more time or more resources, we can give them those because the rest of our work tends to require less time, less attention, fewer resources. So if we have a show at the Edinburgh Fringe, or if we're going on a national tour with something, we can give that all of the attention that it traditionally requires and still create all of the work that we want to make.
Amazing. And I think that speaks to so much of not just what you do, but I think what a lot of people would probably like to do, but have those questions of, well, is this theatre, does this count as proper work? And I think just kind of very much affirm that it absolutely does. And there's especially things to learn and develop and pick up from all of these ways of working that are so integral. And I think one thing that you touched on there that I'd love to dive a bit deeper into is accessibility, because I know that's something you guys are so great at. And it would be great if you could speak a bit about how accessibility is not only bedded into your work, but also how everyone else, regardless of sort of resource, can begin to bed that into theirs.
Absolutely. I think the first thing to understand with accessibility is that it's literally impossible to do it perfectly, that you're not going to be able to. And you can't approach it with, if you do approach your other work with this, a level of perfectionism. Access is human, and as a result, it is infinitely complex. And you are unlikely to be able to ever make one thing literally every single person will be able to engage with in the way that you want to. But that doesn't mean you can't try. That doesn't mean that it's pointless. It just means that it's okay to not do it perfectly. You just have to do it better and better the more and more you do it, like any other process. The second thing I'd say with access is build it in as early into a project as possible. We all know how it gets when, the kind of, you have to put your nose to the grindstone and get something finished. And if you put your access in as the last thing, it will be the first thing taken off when you don't have enough time, don't have enough money, don't have enough resources and some other kind. It will also not feel properly a part of the production. And at least from a political perspective, if you have a disabled audience, they're just part of your audience. If you made a show where you didn't have a lighting design and you didn't turn the lights on, but a part of the show was a visual element, you are disabling the whole audience. If you have a show that you can only listen to through headphones, but then you don't give one of the seats a pair of headphones, you've disabled that audience member. The way you design your show disables your audience. Well, that's just following the social model of disability, which is the idea that human beings have qualities. They aren't necessarily good or bad. They aren't necessarily disabled or non-disabled. It is the society around you and how it caters for and supports you or fails to do so that decides whether you're disabled or not. They put a little bit of blue in green traffic lights. So even if you're colorblind, you can distinguish between the red and green traffic lights more easily. The way that they color the wiring inside plugs also helps. If you are colorblind, you distinguish what those three wires are. See, these are ways we have designed things in the world to stop a physiological property that some people have, but not others, not most people, so that they can still engage in parts of the world independently and without there being a hurdle in the way. And that is just kind of a fundamental truth. And it doesn't have to be about disability. It can be about any sort of access, financial access, geographic access, technological literacy. It can be about anything. So it's just finding a way to design your show or the way you tell your story so that your audience, whoever they might be, can understand the meaning of the show. And that's actually just what you do anyway. You don't want to add loads of bits of the show that aren't relevant to the core message. You don't want to write your show in a complicated way unless that's part of the reason why you're telling it. The form should match the content. And the form will be accessible or inaccessible depending on how you design it and how you deliver it. And some of the easiest things you can just do are captions, which are, first of all, most young audiences watch most content in their life with captions now anyway. Over 50% of people, Gen Z and below, will have captions on for everything. So if you want to appeal to young people, you need captions in your show, or people will potentially either struggle to watch it or just not want to. Or they'll see one and then never come back. And that might actually be worse. And you can do captions any which way. Like I said, there's no wrong way. You can have a video designer design super lovely animated captions and project them into a particular part of the stage. Or you can make a PowerPoint presentation with bits of the script in, and then just have someone hit the space bar to go to the next bit of the script. You can, something I have done, you can buy a flat screen TV off of Gumtree for the beginning of your show, and then put it back up on Gumtree at the end of the show and sell it for what you paid for it. So you haven't actually spent any money on captioning other than your time in copying and pasting lines from the script into a PowerPoint. There are ways to make access affordable and very time efficient, and just to make your work more make your work more accessible to your audiences.
No, completely agree. I remember we similarly did a show where we just think we actually borrowed an old monitor from someone's dad that used to be part of a big old computer, plugged in a HDMI cable and just clicked through a PowerPoint. And it worked really well because the screen was really big. We'd made it very clear to the audience that if you'd like to be closer to the captions, sit on stage right. If you'd like to be further away, sit on stage left. And it was just such a simple way to build that in, that the really only cost was, as you said, making that PowerPoint. And I think people can get quite scared of access in terms of thinking it's going to be either really expensive or they're going to be sort of harassed because they've done it wrong. So I think what you said initially about there's no perfect way to do it is so true and so helpful for lots of people who want to make their work accessible but maybe feel that they can't for some reason. And I think that they're all really great tips to bring in. Bit of a different question now. What is your favourite project you've worked on and why?
Good question. Favorite project, or again, this is difficult, like we've said, because we've done so much work and so much of it is so different. It can be tricky to compare everything. The project what we've revisited the most is our gig theatre show 24, 23, 22. That started as a digital project in 2021. And roughly every 6 years from that point onwards until this month, we have done a version of that show in some way. Late 2021, we did it as a live theatre piece for the first time. Then first half of 2022, we took it to London for 3 weeks. Very last minute, there was a slot, we jumped into it and we figured out how to make it work. End of 2022, we toured it a little bit. Beginning of 2023, we toured it a little bit more. End of 2023, we took it up to Edinburgh for the month. Beginning of this year, we're in the process of recording a cast album. We've recorded it, now I just have to mix it and master it, and then we can release that soon. So it's gone from digital to single location to touring, back into a digital thing. And I think why it's one of my favorite things is not only because our writer Doug, our cast Joe and Ruth have been always brilliant to work with, not just because we've been able to work with our people like Kathleen, who's helped dramaturg it creatively to kind of create a show that we're really happy with and we don't need to keep tweaking. But I think it's a really good example of a lot of the ways that my company does stuff. Like the show has no set. The show has me at the back of the stage controlling the sound, or sometimes the sound and the lights, depending on what the venue can. So the operator is on stage, part of the show. We don't hide the behind the scenes stuff anywhere. Show's a solid hour with a bunch of hyperpop and lo-fi hip hop music, and 2 performers, each has a handheld microphone, very simple costume, maybe a single prop each, color coordinated. The lights are there's like 7 lighting states throughout the whole show. The characters talk to the audience, they move through the audience. There doesn't really feel like a barrier between the audience and the show, and half the times, other than one scene, one character is the audience alongside the audience watching the other character. So I think it helped us explore a lot of concepts we wanted to keep moving forwards. And because we started it in the tail end of lockdown and then continued it when we knew we were making digital theatre, why should we keep making in-person theatre? Because it's so much more effort, it's so much more expensive, it's so much more unsustainable and difficult to afford to make or to see. What is the justification for doing traditional theatre once you know that digital theatre, at least for us as a company, allows us to achieve all of our aims and communicate all of our values? So we thought, well, what are the things that you can do live that you maybe struggle with more via digital? And we think live music is one of those things, being able to just like feel the music rather than listen to it. So gig theatre was an easy way for us to kind of gravitate towards justifying the continued expense and effort of doing a live thing. And I think 24, I mean, it's also one of our shows that's been received the best. We've got 5-star reviews. We've been nominated for Off West End Awards for Best Director, the Popcorn Award for Best Writer up at the Edinburgh Fringe. Like, it's a show that has also mean that we can prove to people that as a company you should pay attention to us, that we do good things. So yeah, all of those are reasons. That's probably my favorite show to work on, but it is biased because it is probably the show I've worked on the most. Like, we've done 6 or 7 iterations of it, so, and they've all gone really well. So yeah,
I think that's a great one to pick, and I think it really does show the scope of what you do and how even if one of your projects starts digitally, it's never confined just to that online space. You can then take it into the live world. You can then make it into a different medium in terms of like an audio recording or sort of loads of different ways that you don't have to pigeonhole yourself or one of your projects. It can be ongoing and transferable and meshable, and that's kind of part of the exciting thing too. I think you've spoken a lot about the digital theatre you make. What sort of skills or training do you think someone who had never made any digital work before but was really interested, what sort of things would you think would be great for them to learn or pick up or sort of investigate a bit more?
You can make really good digital theatre with very simple, just video editing skills. Maybe some audio editing. The easiest tips are that good quality audio is better than good quality video. People care about how things sound more than they care about how things look. That doesn't mean you shouldn't spend $1,000 on a microphone and then film on a potato. But what you should do is not worry about the quality of, even if you just have a phone camera. Most phone cameras are great nowadays. And funnily enough, because they're phones, their microphones are also really good. If you don't have lapel mics and fancy setups, you can get people to turn on voice notes on their phone and put it in the top pocket of their shirt or something, or kind of, keep it somewhere vaguely near their mouth, and you'll get video from a phone at some point and recording as a separate audio file, and then you just kind of synchronize the two. Do that in a video editing program, and then you'll have really good quality audio because it's been recorded really close to someone's mouth. And then also you'll have the video however you want it. Digital theatre doesn't have to be any particular length. You can do a 30-second video and it can be digital theatre, or you can make a 3-hour long sprawling thing across various different websites where people have to navigate and watch a whole bunch of different content. You can just make a radio play. You can just record a podcast. You can just speak. You can do it by yourself. You can write a play or get the rights for a play from a friend of yours, and you can just recite it, and then you have made digital theatre. And you can do that in your voice notes and then just post the voice note to social media or somewhere, put it onto SoundCloud. You can get free trials and free accounts actually for most distribution platforms. We put all our videos on YouTube. We put all our audio on SoundCloud, unless we're doing a project where we need to put stuff onto, say, social media directly, and then we do that. And if you still don't know where to start with stuff, every version of a paid program, there's a free version. You don't need Photoshop. You can get a free version of Photoshop. And if you Google free alternatives to Photoshop, to Logic or Ableton, which are music programs, to whatever the paid, I can't even think of what the paid version of video editing might be, because I use DaVinci Resolve, which is free and is kind of becoming industry standard even in like Hollywood and the highest levels of stuff. So yeah, you can get free versions of all the software you might need. There are amazing YouTube tutorials on how you can do anything you might ever want to do, and they're also all free, and they're made by people who use this software professionally. So you can get free software, you can learn how to do it at your own pace with a teacher on YouTube that you can understand easily, and you'll learn how to do things bit by doing multiple projects. And that's the best way of doing it. I learn through doing more than anything else. And I might now maybe say that I can code, for example, but I started off 5-6 years ago not considering myself a coder, because I would just Google the answer to a coding problem, copy and paste that piece of code into a piece of code, check it, work it. And now I do the exact same thing, but I realize that is being a coder. And maybe I know, having done a few different projects in like game making software, or by trying to get things just to work, building websites, doing that sort of thing, that I can understand the general logic of it. But I've learned it slowly over 5-6 years. And I did a computer science PhD. I didn't know how to code before that either. So this isn't like this isn't me speaking from I did some video stuff when I was a teenager. I did some audio editing when I was a teenager. But coding is an example I've learned very recently when I just needed to, and I didn't have it as a pre-existing skill. And you just kind of trudge along, do it at your own pace, and eventually and learn the stuff you need to learn to do the project. There's nothing wrong with having an incomplete knowledge of something, because the more you do, the more complete that knowledge becomes. But yeah, and you don't need expensive equipment. Or if you only have equipment you think is bad quality, create a show where that's the case. If you have a 90s video camera, set your show in the 90s. Does your house not look like it's in the 90s? Go into the woods. Go onto a moor or a field somewhere. Outdoors always looks like outdoors, and just make a version of the Blair Witch Project. That can be digital theatre. Release it online. Find the footage from 30 years ago and put it on a YouTube channel. That's the way so many people make stuff, and that stuff always tends to resonate really well. So yeah, there's no wrong way of doing it unless you're, unhappy with it.
I was about to say, when you mentioned sort of about going outdoors, the 90s, I was saying, oh, it's just a Blair Witch project. I think that's such a good example of essentially taking, it was obviously very conceptual and at the time very new, but I think it's a really great example of, even though they had a lot of high-tech equipment, essentially using what you have and making something unexpected and interesting. And one of the projects you mentioned, I remember, it was Flavor Text, where essentially it was lots of different websites and video content and bits of different stuff as almost like an investigative choose your own adventure, finding this disappeared, missing boy band. Wasn't it? Was it a boy band?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Yeah. And because that was so mixed medium and interdisciplinary, we had video content, sound content, website pages. And I think that's probably one of the most creative, in a very broad sense, project that I've worked on, because it did cross into so many different platforms and using so many different skills. And I think that's such a great example of something you can just make at home without necessarily nearly anyone else, and could be a great starting point to do something like that, even if it's just like an investigation night for your friends that ends up becoming something a bit bigger. I think it's a great place to test skills too. And speaking of skills, and probably our last question, what would be your biggest piece of advice for someone who wanted to start a career in the industry? So they may have just graduated or just finished college. What would your biggest sort of piece of advice be, and key skill to learn be? Big questions, I know.
It's hard because the key skill to learn is confidence, which as soon as I say it, I know will sink some people. But I think it's more like whatever you can do at the moment, or whoever you are, that's enough. You don't have to be anyone else. You really don't. It's just kind of proving that to yourself, and I think you can do that by just making things. I think you just have to go out and do stuff. No one's going to pay attention to you when you begin. That's great, because it means you can make all your mistakes without the eyes of the world on you. That's the whole point of starting out without, hitting the big time straight away. Make loads of work, make mistakes, annoy people because they thought you were more professional than you were, or because you thought they were more professional than they thought they had to. Like, figure all that out. Work with a whole bunch of different people. Learn who you want to work with and who you don't want to work with, the sort of work you want to make. Lead projects and follow on other people's projects. Like, embed yourself in as many different spaces as possible to learn from. And it's a marathon, not a sprint. Having a career in the arts, in theatre, it's always going to be unsustainable and shaky. We want it not to be that. We want it to be more secure, and it's very unlikely for most of us that's going to be the case. But if you sprint and run out of resources or run out of patience, then you're not going to want to keep doing it. And if you, in this moment right now, want to do it in a sustainable way, you need to find a sustainable pace for yourself. It's almost certainly probably not going to be doing 12 shows every year. That's just because my neurodivergent brain gets really bad if I'm not doing anything. So I do lots of work because I like it and because it helps me. But that doesn't mean you have to do that. You can do one show, you can spend 2 years making it, and then you can tour it for 4 years. That's easily as fine. But that 2 years of making it, do a version, write a scene, get it on at a scratch night. Easier said than done, but talk to 5 pubs in your local area, and one of them will have a function room you can use for free if you buy lunch there, or if the audience for your scratch night each buy a drink, and you can put on a scratch night with just mates, or by just putting it up on Facebook. There's not enough scratch nights at the moment. So if you start one, you might be able to keep that running as quite a thing. And then you'll be able to meet more people. You'll be able to network. You'll be able to have a place to show your own work off and support other people. You start growing a community for the work you want to make in the location where you are, regardless of where that is. Or if you can't do that, go online. The whole benefit of online, the first things we used the internet for were to build communities for shared interests where there weren't enough people around you who had that interest in your physical world. That's what message boards were. That was what the early internet was for. But yeah, I think whatever you want to do, that's enough. You will only become more confident in it by doing it more frequently, and it might feel awkward at the beginning, but you have to kind of carry on with that and push through it. And at some point, if you want to do something different, you can do. And if you want to go back to what you were doing before, you can do that too. You can do whatever you want. It doesn't have to matter at the early career. You have the freedom to make all those decisions yourself. The best career is a slow build, one that slowly you get more and more established, more and more known, more and more trusted, more and more valued by your community or your audiences. The hardest thing, I think, is having an early hit. And we see this with, one-hit wonders within the music industry. We see this with like game developers. We see this with all sorts of people. But we really see it within fringe theatre. There will be companies who maybe like straight out of university will go to something like the National Student Drama Festival. They'll have a really big show that will get taken up to Edinburgh, supported by a whole bunch of people to take it there. Maybe it will do really well at the fringe. And then what happens for their second show? What happens when they don't have the goodwill of the entire industry supporting that production? Some people do really well. They get a second show or they tour, but that's often the company that has a really strong structure and continues to do that support, continues to network and to try and really find those avenues, can be really hungry or can be really privileged and can just kind of figure out how to do it because they already know a whole bunch of people. Like that is also a case for lots of companies that survive. You can't tell just from looking on the outside. You need to consider that if that isn't the situation you find yourself in. But more often than not, I think companies that have like a big early hit can tend to fizzle out into something more sustainable. And sometimes that's not doing anything ever again. And sometimes that is not quite hitting the big hits all the time. That's fine. But that will feel bad, I presume, that you feel like, oh, our last couple of shows got loads of really big attention, and now this one, no one seems to be turning to. Are we doing something wrong? It's like, no, it's just maybe you made the right show at the right point that resonated with people, and now your second show or your third show doesn't do that. It'll happen again. You just have to keep plugging away at it, or you can make the work you want to make and know that because you want to make it, other people will probably want to engage with it as well. Particularly if other people want to make it with you, that's a really good sign. So just make that stuff, be experimental, or be really traditional and ordinary if that's what you want to do, because that'll be probably the widest audience. There's not really a wrong way of doing it. Yeah, that's a very word salady amount of advice, but I think within there, different bits will resonate with you if you've listened to it. And so pick those bits and follow that advice, I guess.
I love that. I love word salad. I've not heard that before. That's brilliant. Fabulous. I think that's some really great advice. And this has been a really amazing coffee morning. And thank you so much for joining us. And if any of you have any further questions for Joe that you've not thought of, do pop us an email. And I'm sure Joe will be happy if I send him a block of questions to send some back that we can send through as well. Or do pop some in the comments below when this goes live online. So yes, thank you, Joe. And we'll see you all next month for our next coffee morning. Take care.